Hey friends, Tony here from TL Yarn Crafts, and in this video we're practicing the Tunisian crochet full stitch using 3 colors. This simple change gives the full stitch dimension and character. If you're looking for the basic one color full stitch, I've got a video for that too. Click the link that just popped up at the top of the screen. If you're excited to learn this Tunisian crochet technique with me, be sure to like this video and consider subscribing to my channel for even more crochet tutorials, free patterns, and product reviews. For this tutorial, I'm using a 6.5mm Tunisian crochet hook and 3 colors of worsted weight yarn. The full stitch is worked over any number of stitches, and for my sample, I'm working over 15 stitches. Here we have our first color. We're going to begin by chaining 15. Made our slip knot, place that on the hook, tighten it down, yarn over, pull up the loop for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. To do our foundation, we'll begin by flipping our chain to the back side where we'll see these bumps here. So we're going to work into those bumps instead of the front of our chain. So we're going to skip this first chain here, go to the second chain, insert our hook in that back bump, yarn over and pull up a loop, and keep that loop on the hook. To the next chain, insert yarn over, pull up a loop, insert yarn over, pull up a loop, and do that for each chain across the row. We'll know we did it properly if we have the same number of loops on our hook as the number of chains that we started with. So insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop. Last one here. Make sure I catch just that loop on the back. There we go. So if we were to do a quick count here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And now we'll want to do our return pass, which means that we'll yarn over, pull up a loop for a chain 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And since we're changing color, we're going to do this until we have 2 loops left on our hook. Just like that. So now we'll want to go to our second color. So we're going to drop our gray, but we're not going to cut it. Our second color will be this pretty purple here. So I'm going to leave a nice long tail, yarn over my hook, and I'm going to pull through these last 2 loops with my purple. Pull up a loop in the space between the first and second stitch. So this space right here is where I'm going to insert my hook, pushing the hook to the back of the work, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now I'm going to go into the space between the next 2 stitches. So here's the second stitch and the third. We're going for the space in between. Insert, pushing to the back, yarn over, pull up a loop. And we're going to do that for each space until we get to the space before the last stitch. So again, we insert in the space between stitches, yarn over, pull up the loop. Insert in the space, yarn over, pull up the loop. I'm making sure I keep my tension fairly loose because I don't want this to curl up on me too much, but it will curl some, so expect that. Making sure I go in the space between stitches. Now when it comes to a stitch, each stitch has a front and a back bar. Front and a back bar of that next stitch, so I'm going to the space in between. Insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop. So here is a stitch, and then my last stitch is here. This is the space before my last stitch. I'm actually going to skip that space and instead go directly to my last stitch. If I flip this towards me, I can see that I've got a front loop and a back loop to my last stitch. So I want to make sure I get under both of those loops. So I'm just going to take the tip of my hook, shimmy into that space, making sure I've got both loops of that last stitch, then I'll yarn over and pull up the loop. At the end of this in every row, I should have 15 loops on my hook because that's the number of stitches that I started with in my beginning chain. Now for my return pass, yarn over, pull through 1 for a chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2, through 2, and through 2, again just until I've got 2 loops left on my hook. yarn over through 2, through 2, through 2, and through 2. Okay, so I'm going to do 3 different colors for my full stitch. I'm going to grab my third color, which is this kind of creamy linen color. Again, leaving a nice long tail to weave in later. I'm going to yarn over my hook and pull through the last 2 loops. For this next row of the full stitch, I actually want to skip the space between the first and second stitch. So here's the space between the first and second stitch. I instead want to go into the space between the second and third stitch. And again, just insert yarn over, pull up the loop, and I'll do that for each space across the row. Insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop, just making sure I'm getting into the space between stitches and then I'm not actually splitting the stitch. So into the space, yarning over and pulling up a loop. So on the previous row, I skipped the space before the last stitch. So this time I'm going to work the space before the last stitch. And then rotating my work towards me, again, I'm seeing that front and back loop of that last stitch, making sure I get under both of those. Insert, yarn over, and pull up the loop. And I should still have 15 loops on my hook here. Starting with a chain 1 for the return pass, then I'll yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, until I've got 2 loops left on my hook. So now I've attached all 3 of my colors, gray, purple, and linen, and now I want to go back to my gray color. So I'm going to move purple and linen out of the way. I'm going to grab the gray, which is still attached to my work, and then just yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. So I'll be carrying the colors up the side of my work, which basically means I just won't cut the yarn in between color changes. So for our last row, we skipped the space between the first and second stitch. So again, we want to go into the space between the first and second stitch on this row, pulling up a loop in the space between stitches until we get to the space before the last stitch. Insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop. Now we're at the space before the last stitch. So here's a stitch here and the last stitch is here. Here would be that space. We're going to skip that space and go under both loops of the last stitch. If you're new to this stitch, it may be really helpful to just count your loops when you get to the end of the row to make sure you have the correct number so you'll know that you're doing it right. And for our return pass, we'll start with a chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2 until we've got 2 loops left on the hook. Yarn over through 2, through 2, and through 2. We've got 2 loops left. So I can see down here I went from gray to purple. So now I'm going to grab my purple, trying my best not to tangle up my colors, yarn over, pull through those last 2. So for the last row, our gray row, we worked in the space between the first and second stitch. So we're going to skip the space between the first and second stitch this time, work in the space between the second and third stitch now. Insert yarn over, pull up the loop, and we're doing that for each space across the row. Insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop, insert yarn over, pull up the loop. In the last row, we skipped the space between the last 2 stitches, so this time we're going to work the space between the last 2 stitches, and then of course make sure we work the last stitch. Chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2, through 2, through 2, and through 2, until we've got 2 loops left on the hook. And we'll continue in this way, changing color each row, and making sure we work both rows of the 2-row repeat for the Tunisian full stitch. As you're working up the Tunisian full stitch, it can get a little tricky to remember which row of the 2-row repeat that you're on. Specifically, I would be able to remember if I meant to skip or work the first space at the beginning of the row, but I had a lot of challenges at the end of the row, remembering if I was meant to work or skip the space before the last stitch. One thing that really helped me was using these stitch markers. So I would mark the row where I worked in the space before the last stitch. And that was a reminder to me when I got down to the end of the row. If the stitch below it was marked, that meant that I was meant to skip the space before the last stitch. And if that row was not marked, then I was meant to work the space before the last stitch. These stitch markers from Cocoa Knits are really easy to use one-handed, so I like to keep about 3 stitch markers going, and then I would take one out of the bottom and add it to the next row where I worked the space before the last stitch. I hope that tip is helpful for you. This video is made as a supplement to the full stitch square as part of the Tunisian holiday sampler blanket. To get the row by row instructions for the full stitch square and learn more about this free sampler Afghan, visit the link in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.